dust did not settle, it conspired. Arthur stood in the center of his study, a rag of grey flannel limp in his hand, observing the mahogany bookshelf he had polished only moments before. Already a fine spectral silt had returned, coating the dark wood in a layer of apathy. It was a grey struggle, this war against the particulate matter of existence. He felt a profound, weary kinship with the dust. It was the physical manifestation of the hours grinding against one another, the inevitable residue of a life lived in a circle. To clean was to deny the grave, yet the grave always whispered back, softer than breath, more persistent than love. He pressed the knuckles of his left hand against his temple. The bird was awake again. That was how he conceptualized the pain that lived in the architecture of his skull. A leaden bird, heavy and cold, nesting in the hollow behind his eye. It did not screech, it pecked, a methodical, rhythmic tapping against the fragile shell of his sanity, searching for a worm of memory it could never quite extract. Tap, 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 the rhythm of a clock that had forgotten how to tell time. Order, Arthur whispered to the stagnant air. There must be order. The house demanded it. It was a structure of hermetic silence, a suburban tomb sealed against a world Arthur could no longer clearly recall. The windows were tall and narrow, looking out upon a lawn that seemed perpetually suspended in the twilight of a late autumn afternoon. The trees stripped of leaves, standing like black veins against a sky the color of wet slate. He did not go outside. There was no need. The interior was his universe, a carefully curated museum of comfort where nothing ever changed, save for the dust. Driven by a sudden, jagged spike of anxiety, the bird digging its talons deeper into his grey matter, Arthur turned from the bookshelf. The cleaning was futile, yet the compulsion to organize was the only tether holding him to the floor. If he stopped moving, he feared he might simply evaporate, dissolving into the very motes dancing in the shafts of pale light. He moved to the closet in the hallway, the floorboards groaning beneath his slippers with the sound of dry bones snapping. He was looking for the box marked winter. It was an absurd search. The season inside the house was a constant sterile temperature, 70 degrees of nothingness. Yet the word winter floated in his mind like a buoy in a fog, promising a heavy coat, a layer of wool to shield him from the chill radiating from within his own marrow. He knelt before the cardboard sarcophagus pushed deep into the shadows under the stairs. The tape was yellowed, brittle as old skin. Arthur peeled it back, the sound sharp and tearing in the silence. The smell hit him first, not the scent of cedar and mothballs he anticipated, but something sharper, chemical and violent. It was the scent of ozone, of burnt rubber, of wet asphalt steaming after a summer storm. It was the smell of a world that moved too fast. His hands, trembling slightly, pushed aside the heavy woolen coats that felt damp to the touch. Buried at the bottom, wrapped in a scarf of red tartan that seemed violently bright in the desaturated room, lay the object. He unwrapped it. It was a camera, an analog SLR,
heavy and encased in a body of black metal and chrome that had begun to piss and rust. It sat in his palm with an unnatural density, as if he were holding a condensed star, a singularity of captured light.
The lens was a dark, unblinking eye, staring up at him with a judgment he could not name. Arthur recoiled, dropping the object onto the carpet. A dull thud resonated through the floor, vibrating up his legs. This was not a nostalgic relic. He felt no warmth of recognition, no soft focus of yesteryear. Instead, a primal animal terror seized his throat. The camera felt infectious. It was a seed of chaos he had unwittingly unearthed from the strata of his orderly life. He stared at it, breathing shallowly. The chrome dials seemed to grin at him. The winder lever was jammed halfway, as if the machine had been frozen in the very act of devouring a moment. "Arthur?" The voice sliced through the gloom, bright and jarring. Arthur jerked his head up. Sarah stood in the archway connecting the hall to the living room. She was smiling, but the smile sat uneasy on her face, like a painting that hadn't quite dried. She was wearing a floral dress, the colors, yellows and pinks, vibrating with an intensity that made Arthur's eyes water. She was too vivid for this grey house. She looked like a creature made of high-frequency static, her edges blurring slightly against the background. "What have you found?" she asked. Her voice was melodious, yet it carried a strange resonance, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. "Nothing," Arthur stammered, his body moving instinctively to shield the camera from her view. "Just old junk, rubbish to be thrown out." Sarah moved. She did not walk so much as manifest closer, the space between them collapsing without the transition of steps. She peered over his shoulder, her eyes wide and luminous. "Oh," she breathed, "the witness. You found the witness." "It's broken," Arthur said, his voice rising in pitch. The bird in his head pecked harder, a warning cadence. "Look at it, Sarah. It's rusted. It's filth." "It is heavy with waiting," she corrected him. She reached out a hand, her fingers long and pale, hovering over the black metal. "It has been holding its breath for a very long time, Arthur, since before the quiet." "Don't touch it," Arthur snapped. The violence of his own voice shocked him. He scrambled to grab the camera, clutching it to his chest, as if it were a grenade he had to smother. "It's dirty. It smells of accidents." Sarah straightened, her expression shifting. The domestic softness evaporated, replaced by a gaze of piercing, ancient clarity. She looked at him not as a wife looks at a husband, but as a sculptor looks at a stubborn block of marble. "There is film inside," she said. It was not a question. "It doesn't matter," Arthur pleaded. He stood up, his knees cracking. He wanted to weep, though he didn't know why. A profound grief was swelling in his chest, pressing against his ribs. "Whatever is on it, it's gone. It's dead. Why can't we just leave it be? Why can't we just be here?" "Because here is nowhere, Arthur," Sarah said softly. "We are floating in a bubble of forgotten time.
You clean the dust, and the dust returns because you are trying to wipe away the truth. That camera, it is the key to the door you locked." "I locked no doors," Arthur cried. The pain in his head was blinding now, a white-hot spear. "I am a simple man. I live a quiet life. I have my books. I have you." "Do you have me?" Sarah stepped closer. For a second, her face seemed to glitch, a flicker of grey, a momentary hollow look of death, before snapping back to her rosy, vibrant mask.
"Or do you have the shadow of me? The memory of a habit?" "Stop it," Arthur whispered. "You're confusing me. The migraine. It's the weather. The pressure's dropping." "The pressure is rising," Sarah insisted. She pointed a finger at the camera in his arms. "The eye must open, Arthur. You must develop the film. You must let the light back into the dark room." "I don't have a dark room." "You have a basement," she countered, her voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "You have always had a basement. You just stopped opening the door." Arthur looked down at the camera. The cold of the metal was seeping through his shirt, freezing his skin. He imagined he could hear a sound coming from inside the casing, not a mechanical whir, but a scream, tiny and distant, trapped in the silver halide crystals of the undeveloped film. Screeching tires, crunching metal. The hallucination terrified him more than the silence. "No," Arthur said. "No, I will not do this. I will not let this poison into our home." He turned and ran. It was a clumsy, desperate shamble through the hallway, past the kitchen where the table was set for a dinner that was never cooked, towards the back door.
"Arthur, you cannot throw it away," Sarah called after him. Her voice was no longer melodic. It was a gale force, shaking the window panes. "It is part of you." He burst through the back door into the garden. The air outside was thick and still, the sky a suffocating blanket of heavy wool. The ravine lay beyond the rusted chain-link fence, a tangle of thorns and black ivy that swallowed the light. Arthur did not stop to think. He approached the precipice of his manicured world, the boundary where the lawn gave way to the wild, chaotic overgrowth. He reared back, the pain in his head exploding in a supernova of agony, and hurled the camera with all the strength of his denial. He watched it arc through the grey air. It tumbled end over end, a black meteorite against the slate sky. It vanished into the brush of the ravine. There was no sound of impact, no crash of metal on stone. It was simply swallowed by the abyss, consumed by the shadows that lay waiting at the edge of his vision. Arthur stood there, heaving, his breath misting in the sudden chill. Silence returned, but it was different now.
It was not the peaceful silence of the library. It was the held breath of a predator before the strike. The birds, which he suddenly realized had never been singing, continued not to sing. The wind died completely. The trees stood like iron bars. He turned back to the house. Sarah was gone. The hallway was empty. Arthur stepped inside and locked the door, sliding the bolt home with a trembling hand. He leaned his forehead against the painted wood, closing his eyes. "It's gone," he muttered to himself, the mantra of a man trying to weave a spell of protection. "It is gone. It is over. I am safe." He walked back to the study. He picked up the grey flannel rag from where he had dropped it. He went to the bookshelf. He began to wipe away the dust that had already returned, trying to ignore the sensation that the house was now watching him, that the walls had drawn in closer, and that the bird in his head had ceased its pecking only to begin to scream. The camera was gone, but the smell of ozone and wet asphalt lingered in the room, heavy and indelible, like the scent of a storm that had already destroyed everything, yet was still approaching.
Time in the house had ceased to flow as a river flows, rushing toward a destination. Instead, it had pooled, stagnant and heavy, like water trapped in a cistern beneath the earth. Arthur did not know if he had slept. The transition from the previous violence, the hurling of the machine into the void, to the present moment was seamless and terrifyingly vague, a cut in a film reel that skipped a crucial beat of existence. He found himself standing in the hallway, the morning light filtering through the transom window, not with the golden promise of a new day, but with a sickly, jaundiced pallor. It was a light without warmth, a mere illumination of dust, revealing the suspended particles of his life floating in an ether of silence. The headache, which had receded into a dull throb during the night, began to stir again in the nest of his temple, the leaden bird wakened, sharpening its beak against the soft grey matter of his consciousness. Arthur moved toward the kitchen. He was a creature of habit, and the rituals of the bourgeois life, the kettle, the porcelain cup, the toast, were the only armour he possessed against the encroaching chaos. He clung to the idea of breakfast as a drowning man clings to a spar of driftwood, believing that if he could simply perform the pantomime of living, life itself would be obligated to return to its tracks. He pushed open the swinging door. The kitchen was pristine, a temple of linoleum and chrome, smelling faintly of lemon polish and the stale, recycled air of a tomb. And there, sitting in the precise geometric center of the small circular table, was the camera. Arthur stopped. His heart, a traitorous drum, hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He gripped the doorframe, his knuckles turning the color of old parchment. It was impossible. He had thrown it. He had watched the arc of its descent. He had seen the abyss swallow it whole. The physics of his world dictated that the object should be rusting in the wet mulch of the ravine, untroubled by human eyes. Yet here it sat. It was no longer the dry, dusty relic he had unearthed from the winter box. It was a monstrosity of the deep. It was slick with black mud, dripping a foul, dark water onto the tablecloth Sarah had embroidered with bluebells. Strands of wet, decaying leaves clung to the lens like necrotic skin. It smelled of the swamp, of ozone, and of deep, disturbed earth, a scent that violated the antiseptic sanctity of the kitchen. Arthur did not approach it.
He could not, he realized, with a sinking horror that felt like a stone dropping through his stomach, that the laws governing this space were no longer the laws of Newton or Einstein. They were the laws of the psyche, of the nightmare, where the repressed object returns with a gravitational force equal to the energy used to expel it. He was the Sisyphus of suburbia, and the camera was his stone, rolling back down the hill of his denial to crush him. "I am ill," Arthur whispered, the words sounding foreign in the stillness. "I am the madman locked in the attic of the world. This is a fever dream." He backed away, retreating into the living room, leaving the black idol to drip its muck onto the table. He needed noise. He needed distraction. He reached for the radio on the sideboard, his fingers trembling as he turned the dial. He sought the comforting banality of the news, the weather report, a jazz quartet, anything to drown out the silence that roared in his ears. But the radio produced only a static hiss, white noise that rose and fell like the breathing of a great metallic lung. And then, cutting through the static, came the sound. It was not a voice. It was a screech, high, agonizing, and mechanical. The sound of rubber flaying against asphalt. Arthur clapped his hands over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut. "No," he hissed. "Plumbing. It is the pipes. Old pipes singing in the walls." The sound did not obey him. It intensified, layering upon itself. The screech of breaking tires was joined by the terrible, crunching symphony of steel folding upon itself. It was the sound of structure failing, of safety glass shattering into a million diamonds, of a heavy chassis twisting like a damp rag. It was a violent, percussive loop, playing over and over, vibrating the floorboards beneath his feet. Screech, crunch, silence. It was an auditory siege. The noise seemed to originate not from the speakers of the radio, but from the center of his own skull, resonating perfectly with the pulse of his migraine. The bird in his temple pecked harder, matching the rhythm of the crash. Each impact in the soundscape was a spike of agony behind his left eye. "Sarah!" he cried out, his voice cracking. He needed a witness. If she heard it, it was real. If it was real, it could be fixed. If it was only in his head, then he was lost in the labyrinth of his own degeneration. "Sarah!" He stumbled toward the hallway, the sound of the unseen accident pursuing him, echoing off the framed prints of pastoral landscapes that lined the walls. The house felt smaller, the ceiling lower. The architecture was conspiring against him, the angles of the corners sharpening like teeth. He ran to the bathroom on the ground floor, slamming the door and locking it, a futile gesture against an enemy that walked through walls. He turned on the tap, splashing cold water onto his face, gasping for air. The shock of the cold momentarily dampened the cacophony outside. He gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, staring down at the swirling drain, watching the water spiral away into the dark piping of the house's gut. Slowly, terrified of what he might see, Arthur lifted his head to look into the mirror. The man who looked back was Arthur, and yet it was a stranger. The reflection was drained of vitality. The skin was not the flush pink of exertion, but a waxen, putty grey, like a photograph left too long in the sun. The eyes were hollowed out, dark pits of exhaustion that seemed to look through him rather than at him. For a flickering instant, a shutter speed of a second, the image distorted. The smooth skin of his forehead split open. A jagged, weeping laceration appeared above the hairline, dark blood masking the grey face. The reflection's mouth opened in a silent scream of absolute terror. Arthur recoiled, crying out, stumbling back against the towel rack. He blinked rapidly, his breath coming in ragged hitches. When he looked again, the wound was gone. The blood was gone. Only the grey, frightened man remained, trembling in the glass. "The stranger in the glass," Arthur murmured, a phrase bubbling up from the murky depths of his education. "The vessel is cracking. The paint is peeling from the canvas." He could not stay in this room. The claustrophobia was a physical weight pressing against his chest, constricting his lungs. He needed air. He needed to leave the house. He needed to walk away from the camera, away from the sounds of the phantom crash, away from the grey reflection. He would walk to the town, find a doctor, find sanity. He unlocked the bathroom door and burst into the hallway, making for the heavy oak front door. He fumbled with the latch, his fingers clumsy and numb. He threw the door open, expecting the rush of cool suburban air, the sight of the manicured lawn, the street. The door swung wide. Arthur stepped through and found himself standing in the hallway he had just left. He froze. He spun around. Behind him was the bathroom door. In front of him, where the porch should have been, was the staircase leading up to the bedrooms. "No," he whispered. "No, this is a trick of the light." He turned back to the door, slammed it shut, and opened it again. The hallway, the same rug, the same ticking grandfather clock. He ran to the back door, the one leading to the garden and the ravine. He wrenched it open. The hallway. He ran to the windows in the living room. He clawed at the heavy velvet drapes, ripping them aside. Beyond the glass, there was no garden, no sky, no sun. There was only a swirling, impenetrable grey mist, a wall of fog that pressed against the pane like living cotton. The world outside the house had ceased to exist. The house was no longer a dwelling. It was a capsule floating in a void of nothingness. It was a shell, and he was the yolk trapped inside, waiting to be consumed. Arthur fell to his knees in the center of the living room rug. The house was a loop, a Mobius strip of domesticity. The concept of outside had been deleted. "Why?" he wept, holding his head, rocking back and forth. "What do you want from me?" "You know what is wanted, Arthur." The voice was not the screech of tires. It was melodious, yet terrible, resonating with the authority of a judge handing down a sentence. Arthur looked up. Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, but this was not the Sarah of the day before, the fluttery, anxious wife who worried about dust and dinner. This Sarah loomed. She seemed taller, her silhouette elongated by the strange, sourceless light. Her dress, usually a floral print, appeared dark, absorbing the shadows around her. Her face was still beautiful, but it was the beauty of a marble statue, cold, perfect, and utterly indifferent to his suffering. She descended the stairs slowly, her feet making no sound on the wood. In her hands, she held the camera. It was dry now, clean.
The mud was gone, replaced by a dull, menacing sheen. "I cannot leave," Arthur choked out, scrambling backward on the floor until his back hit the sofa. The doors are broken. The world is gone." "The world is not gone, Arthur," Sarah said, stopping a few feet from him. Her voice contained multitudes. It sounded like Sarah, but also like the wind in the dry leaves and the sound of earth falling on a coffin lid. "You have simply withdrawn from it. You have built a fortress of forgetting, but the walls are crumbling. You cannot starve the truth. You must digest it." "I don't want it," Arthur screamed, the migraine flaring so violently that his vision blurred at the edges. "I want peace. I want to sit in my chair. I want the dust to stay away." "There is no peace in a lie," Sarah said. She held the camera out to him. It seemed to pulse, a black heart beating in her white hands. "This is the eye that saw the end. You must look through it to see the beginning." "It's a camera," Arthur pleaded, tears streaming down his grey cheeks. "Just a machine. It means nothing." "It is a seed," she corrected him, "and it has rooted in your soul. You are sick, my love. You are sick with the illness of the unfinished."
"You are a ghost, haunting your own denial." "I am not a ghost," Arthur shouted, though the conviction in his voice was brittle. "I am flesh. I feel pain." "Pain is the only thing that is real to you now," Sarah said softly, "because it is the only thing connecting you to the moment you broke." She took a step closer. The air around her was freezing. The cozy warmth of the house had evaporated, replaced by the chill of a winter highway. "Finish the roll, Arthur." "I don't know how," he lied. He curled into a ball, hiding his face. "Do not lie to the mirror," Sarah commanded. Her voice cracked like a whip. "You know. The dark room, the room you pretend is a wine cellar, the room you pretend is storage, the room you have walled off in the architecture of your mind." She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a key. It was old, brass, and tarnished black. "The pain will not stop," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than her shout. "The bird will peck until there is nothing left of you but a husk. The sound of the crash will never cease. The house will shrink until it crushes you, unless you go down." Arthur looked at the key. He looked at the camera. The migraine spiked. It was no longer a headache. It was a white-hot spear driven through his skull. He cried out, a raw, animal sound of pure agony. The screech of the tires returned, louder than ever, accompanied by the smell of burning rubber and copper blood. He could not endure it. The illusion of safety was gone. The sanctuary was a torture chamber. Defeated, broken, Arthur reached out with a trembling hand. He took the camera. It was heavy, impossibly heavy, carrying the weight of 20 years of silence. He took the key. It was cold enough to burn his skin. "Where?" he rasped. Sarah pointed to a narrow door beneath the staircase. a door Arthur had walked past 1,000 times and never truly seen, his mind glazing over it as if it were a blank spot in his vision. "The basement," Sarah said. "The underworld. Go, Arthur. Do not come back until you are whole." Arthur stood up. His legs felt like water. He walked to the narrow door. He inserted the key. The lock turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk, the sound of a seal breaking. He opened the door. Darkness spilled out, thick and smelling of vinegar and sulfur, the smell of acetic acid, the smell of creation and preservation. He looked back at Sarah one last time. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the empty air, her expression one of profound, ancient mourning. She was the priestess sending the sacrifice to the altar. Arthur stepped into the dark. He found the switch for the light, but he knew with an instinct that bypassed his conscious mind that the overhead bulb would not work. He fumbled in the gloom until his fingers found the switch for the safe light. A dim red glow bathed the steep wooden stairs. It was the color of blood, the color of the womb, the color of a warning. Arthur began to descend. With every step, the sounds of the house, the screeching tires, the humming silence faded, replaced by the rhythmic, wet thumping of his own heart. He was descending into himself. He was going down to meet the stranger in the glass. The camera in his hand felt warm now, vibrating slightly, eager to deliver its terrible message. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing him in the red dark. The air in the basement was thick and motionless, preserved like a fly in amber. Under the sanguine wash of the safe light, the room ceased to be a mere physical space and transformed into the atrium of a temple, or perhaps the inner chamber of a heart. Here, the laws of the sunlit world above held no sway. The silence was absolute, save for the shallow, ragged intake of Arthur's breath and the soft, liquid sounds of his preparations. He moved with the somnambulistic grace of a man who has performed a ritual 1,000 times in dreams, though his wakened mind claimed ignorance. His hands, trembling only moments before, found a steady mechanical competence as they touched the tools of the trade. The developing tank, the reels, the bottles of chemistry. They were not foreign objects, but extensions of his own will, forgotten limbs he had suddenly remembered how to flex. The pungent, biting scent of acetic acid and the metallic tang of fixer rose to meet him, an olfactory assault that did not repel him, but rather embraced him. It was the scent of alchemy, the smell of transition, where the invisible is made visible and the fluid is made fixed. Arthur wound the film onto the reel in the pitch blackness required for the task, his fingers seeing what his eyes could not. In that total dark, stripped of the illusion of the visual world, he felt the heavy leaden bird in his temple stir. But it did not peck, it waited. The migraine had withdrawn into a tense, vibrating singularity, a suspended cord waiting for resolution.
He felt a profound kinship with the celluloid strip in his hands, a latent potential, holding a ghost within its emulsion, waiting for the chemical baptism to give it form. Agitate, he whispered to the darkness, the words slipping out like a prayer. Rest, agitate. He poured the developer into the tank. The clock ticked, a rhythmic metronome counting down the moments of his ignorance. He inverted the tank, listening to the liquid slosh inside, a sound like the tide of a dark ocean lapping against the shores of his consciousness. He was washing away the dust of the house, the dust of the years, the dust of his own denial. He was the alchemist of his own demise, distilling the gold of truth from the base lead of his suffering. When the negatives were washed and hung to dry, dripping onto the concrete floor like weeping willows, Arthur engaged the enlarger.
The red light returned, casting long melodramatic shadows against the peeling walls. He selected the first strip, the celluloid cool and sharp against his skin, and fed it into the carrier. He projected the image onto the easel below. The light passed through the negative, reversing the values of the world. Darkness became light, and light became darkness. A perfect metaphor for the inverted existence he had been living. He slid a sheet of photographic paper beneath the beam, exposed it, and then slipped it into the developer tray. Arthur leaned over the tray, rocking it gently. The liquid rippled, silver and black. He watched with the fascination of a creator and the dread of a condemned man as the image began to bloom from the white void. First, the greys emerged, soft and indistinct. Then the deep blacks anchored the composition. It was Sarah. She sat in the passenger seat of their old sedan, her head thrown back in a laugh that Arthur could almost hear echoing off the basement walls. The sunlight caught the stray hairs escaping her scarf, creating a halo of pure, unadulterated life. It was a moment of eros, of love and vitality, captured and frozen. Arthur stared at it, tears pricking his eyes. He remembered the day. The air had smelled of pine and anticipation. They were going somewhere new. They were escaping the stagnation of the city. He moved to the next frame. The mood of the images shifted. The clear sky was swallowed by grain and shadow. Rain smeared the windshield, transforming the world outside into an impressionistic smear of grey and black. Sarah's face was no longer laughing. She was looking at him, or rather at the man holding the camera, with a sudden sharp concern. The angle was askew, the horizon tilted. The leaden bird in his temple spread its wings. The pain returned, not as a throb, but as a high, piercing frequency, the sound of a nervous system overloaded by reality. "I do not want to see," Arthur whispered, gripping the edge of the sink until his knuckles turned the colour of the bone beneath. "I want the dust. I want the quiet." But the magic theatre of the mind had opened its doors, and the performance could not be stopped. He printed the next image. Chaos, a blur of motion so violent it looked like a tear in the fabric of the universe. Guardrails twisted like licorice. A horizon that was upside down. Shattered glass suspended in the air like diamond dust caught in the flash of the strobe. The camera must have fired blindly, a mechanical reflex in the midst of catastrophe. Arthur was sobbing now, a dry, heaving sound that tore at his throat. The basement seemed to contract, the red light pulsating in time with his racing heart. He reached for the final negative. It was the end of the roll. The film was scratched, damaged by the violence of its journey. He exposed the paper. He dropped it into the tray. He rocked the liquid. The image that rose from the chemical bath was not a memory Arthur possessed. It was a memory that possessed Arthur. The photo was taken from a low angle, resting on wet leaves and mud. It looked upward into the night, illuminated by the harsh, unflinching glare of the car's headlights, one of which was smashed and cast on a fractured beam. In the foreground, thrown clear of the twisted metal carcass of the vehicle, lay a man. His body was a broken marionette, limbs cast at unnatural angles that defied the symmetry of life. The clothes were torn, soaked in a fluid that registered as black ink in the monochrome print. But the face was untouched, preserved in a mask of sudden, total vacancy. The eyes stared up into the lens, wide and glassy, seeing nothing, reflecting the flash of the camera that lay on the ground nearby. It was Arthur. He stared at his own corpse. He looked into the dead eyes of the stranger in the photograph and felt the gaze returned. The circuit closed. The paradox collapsed. The migraine exploded. It was not pain, but a supernova, a blinding, searing white light that obliterated the basement, the red safe light, the tray and the trembling hands. It was the breaking of the shell. The agony was the friction of the soul tearing itself free from the illusion of flesh. Arthur screamed, but he had no voice. He fell, but there was no floor. And then silence. The pain vanished instantly, leaving behind a clarity so sharp it felt like cold mountain air filling lungs that had breathed only smoke for decades. The heavy leaden bird had flown. The anxiety, the weariness, the constant grinding confusion, it all dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Arthur stood up. He looked down at the developing tray, but it was dry and full of dust. The paper was yellowed and brittle, crumbling at the edges. He looked at his hands. They were translucent, shimmering with a faint, pearlescent luminosity. He could see the grain of the wooden cable through his palms. He turned. The basement door was gone. The walls were no longer solid concrete, but shifting curtains of grey fog. Through the mist, a figure approached. Sarah did not walk. She drifted, her feet brushing the floor without weight. She was no longer the housewife in the floral dress, nor the terrifying judge who had handed him the key. She was dressed in black, the heavy fabric absorbing the light, but her face shone with a radiance that hurt Arthur's eyes. It was the compassionate, terrible radiance of finality. "You remembered," she said. Her voice was not a sound, but a vibration in Arthur's very essence. It was the voice of the wind through the pines, the voice of the rain on the roof. "I am dead," Arthur said. The words carried no fear, only a profound, melancholic wonder. "I died 20 years ago, in the rain, on the road to the coast." You died, Sarah confirmed, stopping a few feet away from him. But you could not leave. You clung to the shadow of the house. You built a labyrinth of dust and routine to hide from the moment of impact. You trapped yourself in the migraine because the pain was the only thing that felt like life. Arthur looked around. The illusion of the basement faltered. The ceiling dissolved, revealing patches of a twilight sky through rotten floorboards. Roots of great trees hung down like chandeliers, penetrating the space where he had thought he was safe. The smell of chemicals was replaced by the scent of damp earth, wet moss, and decay. The house was not a home. It was a ruin. It was a foundation overgrown by the indifferent march of nature, a hollow shell where a ghost had played at being a man. "And you?" Arthur asked, looking at the luminous woman. "You were there, in the car." "I went on," Sarah said softly. "I flowed into the stream, but a part of me, the part of me that loved you, the part that was tethered to your sorrow, remained. I came back to wake you. I came to break the mirror." Arthur looked back at the camera. It sat on a moss-covered stone, rusted, the lens cracked, a relic of a civilization that had moved on without him. It was the anchor that had held him in the harbor of his denial. Now the chain was broken. "It is time," Sarah said, extending a hand. Her fingers were made of starlight. Arthur felt a moment of hesitation, the last vestige of the ego clinging to its individuality. To take her hand was to cease to be Arthur. It was to become something else, something vast and impersonal, a drop of water returning to the ocean. He thought of his books, his chair, the comfort of his small, dusty prison. But then he looked at the ruin around him, saw the futility of the loop he had trapped himself in, the cleaning, the forgetting, the pain. The man was a fiction, the ghost was a memory, the truth was the light waiting beyond the trees. He stepped forward. He did not walk, he flowed. He reached out and took Sarah's hand. The touch was not cold. It was a shock of recognition, a reunion of separated elements. The boundaries of his form began to soften. The grey, distorted reflection he had seen in the mirror melted away. He felt himself expanding, rising, becoming the air, the light, the silence. The walls of the basement fell away completely. The house was gone. There was only the forest, ancient and patient, and the soft golden light of a morning that had been waiting for 20 years to dawn. Arthur looked at Sarah one last time, but there was no Sarah, and there was no Arthur. There was only the light dancing on the wet leaves and the sound of a bird singing high in the canopy, free and unburdened. The spirit dissolved into the eternal stream, leaving behind the heavy rusted camera in the hollow of the ruined foundation. Its shutter was closed, its work finished, guarding the silence of the empty woods.